All right, class, today's lesson 17. Welcome back. We are going to be looking at a couple different articles that are short. Don't worry, I know. And each of those articles talks about a different way to combat slavery from the 1800s. And it's going to be your job to decide which way of fighting against slavery is most effective. Let's go. All right, here we are, and today we'll still be looking at our summarizing of a text using text evidence without bias. And we're going to have those two articles like I mentioned, and really they're on how to rebel a little bit, how they overcame slavery, and there are two different approaches like I mentioned, and they're both from the Chattanooga Times, our newspaper in our simulation. And we're going to have to write an opinion that sort of compares and contrasts the different forms of activism that these were at the time. So you're going to read this article, or you can listen to me read it here in a second for you, and then notice the impact that the first author had, which was Harriet Beecher Stowe, and then notice the second person and what he accomplished, and in your head try to think about what those differences were, and then compare them in your opinion piece. That second person, was John Brown. I don't think I said that. Anyways, here we go. Chattanooga Times. 300,000 volumes sold. Uncle Tom's Cabin, the greatest book of the age. And this is actually a real book, just in case you were wondering. So, the anti-slavery movement has found a voice in a novel titled Uncle Tom's Cabin. The 39-year-old novelist, Harriet Beecher Stowe, has created a storm with this new publication. In her book, she creates the characters of Uncle Tom, Little Eva, Topsy, and Simon Legree. Her story tells the tragic tale of a devout and selfless slave who rescues a white child. After the rescue, a ruthless slave owner, Simon Legree, sells Uncle Tom. Simon Legree is so angry with Uncle Tom and his Christian virtue that he has the slave flogged to death. This heartfelt tale has made Mrs. Stowe a voice for the abolitionist movement. Her story first appeared in the journal National Era and was then published as a novel. The book has sold 300,000 copies. This is a record number for a novel. Supporters of slavery are upset by the popularity of the book and have written a number of essays in defense of slavery. These essays have been published as a collection titled The Pro-Slavery Argument. Okay, so in that little piece there, they just gave a synopsis on kind of the book and why it upset people, and then sort of the reaction to it. And the reaction is kind of the important part as far as how we decide the effectiveness of this person's fight against slavery. Okay, we'll take a look now at the other article, and it's titled John Brown Hangs for Harper's Ferry. John Brown was hanged today for treason, murder, and conspiring with slaves to rebel against slavery. His attack on the United States Arsenal at Harper's Ferry on October 17, 1859, caused several people's deaths, including 2 of his sons. Brown planned to take over the arsenal and then turn the town into a base for slave uprising. John Brown was born in Connecticut 59 years ago and became obsessed with freeing the slaves. In an attempt to save his life, some of Brown's supporters stated that he was insane and not responsible for his actions. Nevertheless, he was convicted of his crime and sentenced to death. On the way to the gallows, he handed his jailers a note that stated, "I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed, it might be done. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote, "They are leading old John Brown to execution. This is sowing the wind to reap the whirlwind, which will soon come." Okay, so just to break down a couple of those little pieces there, basically John Brown is saying that he originally thought that he wouldn't have to accomplish what he wanted to. In other words, he says freeing the land, the guilty land of its crimes, essentially is what he's trying to say. And he's saying that he thought he wouldn't have to do that by shedding a lot of blood. So he's now realized that's not the case, and this is what he's saying on his way to being hung himself. And then finally, a poet there at the end says that executing John Brown is essentially leading, is going to flourish or blossom or grow into a whirlwind which will come. In other words, he's saying this is going to cause a storm. Okay, so you've got those two different approaches, and then down at the bottom, you're going to answer the question in the form of an opinion. Which approach do you think is most effective in changing the nation's stance on slavery? Compare the two, give your opinion, and support your answer with evidence from the text. Make sure that you're writing a paragraph at least, because in your paragraph, your first sentence is going to be your opinion statement. Then you're going to present a little bit from each side, like one sentence that says kind of what John Brown did and the reaction to it, and then what Harriet Beecher Stowe did and the reaction to it. And then you're going to explain why your opinion makes sense in light of that. And you'll introduce like a piece of evidence that you feel like supports the way you feel. All right. Okay, class. So you can see there's two different ways that we can go about fighting for the rights of slaves and helping them to be free. One was fairly violent and one was fairly peaceful. And it's going to be totally up to you. There is not a right answer. It's your call. Just make sure that whatever you choose, you include in your opinion a little summary of each one, maybe one sentence, and then have evidence that support why you feel the way you do. Because that's what we need to do when we write an opinion. All right. So as always, it's been fun this week getting to dive into Civil War stuff with you, specifically slavery and some of the differences across the United States and how we handled those. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some. We'll see you next week. As always, like, share, subscribe. See ya.